Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
This one's huge, maybe even a little daunting. We're talking imperialism.
Uh-huh.
Specifically, how European powers kind of carved up Africa
Right.
in the late 19th, early 20th centuries.
Mhm.
We've got some really insightful college lecture notes for this one.
Okay.
So, well, like a crash course. Ambition,
Yeah.
exploitation, the ripples of it all still felt today.
It's wild how much this stuff still matters,
Yeah.
Like it's not just dates and treaties, it's about global power dynamics.
Exactly. So how do we even begin to unpack this? Why this hunger for land, this redrawing of the map with honestly such audacious strokes?
Got to start with the heart of it, right? Imperialism. It's about power.
Mm.
One nation flexing its muscles to control others.
Okay.
Politically, economically, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
Think of a colony not just as some far-off place, but as a community.
Mm.
Robbed of its autonomy, resources just siphoned away. By 1900, most of Africa and Asia, they're under the thumb of Europe or the United States.
Wow, a whole continent treated like, what, a chessboard? It's a lot to
Yeah,
really wrap your head around.
absolutely. And the motives were messy, all tangled up. But the lecture notes, they boil it down to three main drivers: gold, glory, God.
Okay, I like that. Catchy. And gold seems like as good a place to start as any. Resources, riches, that good old-fashioned pursuit of wealth. Classic.
Classic, yep. Nations wanted raw materials, cheap labor, new markets to peddle their goods, and of course, juicy investment opportunities.
So they saw these territories as, what, ripe for the taking, just there to fuel their own growth?
You hit the nail on the head. And a perfect example, brutal but important, is the Boer War in South Africa, 1899 to 1902. Britain wins, yeah, but it's not just about the land itself. They secure those gold and diamond mines that everyone wanted. High stakes.
Jeez. It's easy to forget that this wasn't some, like, abstract game. Real consequences, often driven by, well, greed and a pretty ruthless pursuit of profit.
Right. But it wasn't just about the tangible stuff either. This ties into glory. A big old empire, colonies everywhere.
Yep.
It was a status symbol.
Projecting power,
Yeah.
stroking
But
ego.
yeah, the British, they were experts at this. At their peak, they bragged that the sun never set on the British Empire. They literally had colonies in every time zone.
Wow.
Imagine the effect of that, right? Feeling invincible if you're British, but for those under their rule.
Totally. It's almost like an early form of branding, yeah. Projecting this image of power to everyone else.
For sure.
But that brings us to God. And that feels like, well, we're entering some pretty murky water now.
Yeah, this is where it gets even more uncomfortable. We're talking about this belief in cultural superiority and, tragically, often racial superiority, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The lecture notes mention this whole drive to civilize others
Mm-hmm.
through religion, through forcing European culture on people. It's hard to stomach how they justified it all.
It's staggering, the arrogance,
Yeah.
this white man's burden, this supposed duty to uplift other societies. They completely disregarded all the rich histories and cultures that were already thriving. And then there's social Darwinism underpinning it all.
I've heard the term, but to be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on what it actually means.
Imagine taking Darwin's ideas, survival of the fittest, and twisting them to justify racial hierarchies.
Oh, wow.
They actually believed Europeans were more evolved, therefore destined to rule.
That's really disturbing.
That's a dark side of history we have to confront.
Absolutely. So we've got greed, we've got ego, this dangerous sense of superiority. How did this all play out specifically in Africa? Because it became a prime target, right?
Africa, to them, was often painted as this dark continent, a phrase loaded with racism.
Right.
Yeah, it was resource-rich, full of potential, but that label, it fed this narrative of Africa as savage, uncivilized,
Yeah.
needing European enlightenment.
Ugh, it's like they created their own justification, masking everything behind this facade of altruism. And then there's the scramble for Africa.
A land grab of epic proportions. European nations just racing to claim as much as they could. From the 1880s to World War I, the map of Africa was redrawn in a frenzy of treaties, annexations. It was wild.
It's crazy to think about a whole continent's fate being decided like that, just carved up. What changed? Why this sudden rush to colonize everything? Was it just about planting flags the fastest?
Technology played a huge part. Steamships meant they could get to and from Africa way quicker than railroads, those snake inland. Moving goods, troops, getting those resources out.
So access was key, being able to reach deeper, control these massive distances.
Exactly. And then the real game changer,
Mm-hmm.
the Max machine gun. Invented 1884, right when the scramble was heating up. Hundreds of rounds a minute. Europeans had a massive advantage over most African armies with that.
A grim reminder, right? How technology can be used for good or for, well, for a lot of harm.
Absolutely. Oh, and we can't forget quinine, that medicine. Crucial for fighting malaria, which had always been a huge problem for Europeans in Africa.
Huh.
Without it, things would have been way harder for them.
So it wasn't just brute force. They also had to, like, overcome the environment that had held them back before.
Right. All these factors combined, it tipped the scales massively in Europe's favor. They could get everywhere, move stuff easily, and their military, far more powerful.
Then there's the Berlin Conference. That's like the poster child for this whole scramble for Africa.
Picture this, 14 European nations all gathered in Berlin in 1884. Not to negotiate, really, but to divide up Africa amongst themselves. No African leaders even invited.
Wow. Just wow. The arrogance is astounding. That's not diplomacy. That's just taking what you want.
It was. The Berlin Conference basically formalized it all, drawing borders with almost no regard for the people already living there. Ethnic groups, cultural ties, history got ignored, and we're still dealing with the fallout from that today.
It's kind of terrifying how these decisions echo through time like that.
It really is. They planted the seeds for so much conflict. Borders that ignored old rivalries, lumped different groups together. It created so much instability in many places.
Speaking of influential figures, the lecture notes mention Cecil Rhodes, a guy who really embodies the whole ambition, but also the ruthlessness of this period.
Rhodes, yeah, grand ambitions, that one. Totally believed in British dominance. He imagined a British-controlled Africa stretching from Cape to Cairo, even tried to make it happen with this huge, though ultimately unfinished plan for a transcontinental railway.
Trying to reshape a whole continent to fit his vision, that's something.
His story, it's a good look into the mindset back then. These weren't just faceless empires, It was individuals with their own motivations, flaws driving it all. That unfinished railway, it's a good reminder that even with all their ambition, they couldn't achieve everything they set out to do.
It's interesting, right, how these huge events come down to the decisions, the beliefs of individual people. Reminds you that history isn't just dates, it's about humans.
Totally. And just like those people, the events were captured, even shaped by the media of the time. Political cartoons, propaganda, photos. Each one gives us a peek into how people saw imperialism, how they justified it.
Oh, right, like those images from the lecture notes. There was that cartoon, I think it was from Punch magazine, showing Cecil Rhodes as this giant striding across Africa. It's a striking image, but obviously biased. It's meant to glorify him and the whole empire thing.
Exactly. Stuff like that, it's engaging, seems straightforward, but it reveals so much about the biases back then. Or take the Light of the World cartoon from 1890. Shows a European figure literally bringing light to a dark Africa.
Yikes.
Yeah, it might seem harmless on the surface, but it plays right into that idea of European superiority that fueled so much of this era.
It's a good point. We should always look at historical sources, especially visuals, with a critical eye. Ask what the message is, what they were going for.
All about context and perspective. These weren't just random images. They were created in a specific time and place, reflecting what people believed back then.
They add another dimension to it all, don't they? Like we're getting the text version, but also these visual echoes of what it all meant.
Precisely. It reminds us that history isn't simple. It's a jumble of different viewpoints, interpretations, agendas.
It's like we're putting together this puzzle, but it's not a nice, neat image, is it? It's this messy, kind of disturbing story. Power, ambition, and the consequences just keep echoing.
And that's why studying history matters so much, right? It's not just about memorizing names and dates. It's about grappling with these really complex, difficult things, looking at it from different angles. Because how they made choices back then, it still affects us.
Totally. So as we come up from this deep dive into, well, the age of imperialism, what are the big takeaways? If we had to sum it up, what's the headline?
Imperialism, in all its forms, it leaves scars. It was a brutal system, fueled by greed, obviously, this thirst for power, and this belief that they were superior, toxic.
And those scars aren't just in the past, are they? They're still part of the world today.
100%. We see the legacy of it in conflicts that are still going on, in economic inequality, those borders they drew. Those are still causing problems, dividing people, creating tension.
It's heavy stuff, but so important to understand. This deep dive has really changed how I see this period, how much it still affects everything.
That's the thing about knowledge, right? It makes you question what you thought you knew, see things in a new light, makes you ask those tough questions.
It does.
Like, how do we even begin to fix the imbalances caused by all that exploitation? How do we make sure we don't repeat these mistakes?
Those questions feel more relevant than ever, don't they? With everything going on in the world, it's not just history.
Exactly.
And for our listeners, if you're ready to keep digging into this, think about this. Where do you see the impact of imperialism in your own community, in your part of the world? And knowing what we know now, what can we do as individuals, as communities, to dismantle these systems that are still holding people back, to try and build a better future, a more just future for everyone?
Yes. Keep asking those questions. Keep learning. Keep challenging things. The more we understand the past, the better shot we have at creating a brighter future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. On that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, everyone, stay curious.